All right, it looks like several people have joined. We'll go ahead and get started. I've hit record. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Oregon Project Management Advisory Board, welcome to our Project Management User Group presentation. My name is Amy Croucher, your coordinator for 2022, and will be facilitating our meeting today. We'd like to start with a few housekeeping items. Please mute your phone or PC if not speaking to help reduce any background noise. If you're not speaking, you are encouraged to remain off camera. As you may have noticed, this meeting is being recorded. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them throughout the presentation or place them in the chat, and we will discuss them periodically. Also, if you're interested, if you're interested in business analyst processes, the Business Analyst Networking Group meets the third Wednesday during months in which PMUG does not meet. For more information, visit the BANG website posted in the chat. And I'll go ahead and do that. And there we go. And again, this meeting is being recorded, and a link to the meeting will be shared. The recording of the meeting will be shared after the presentation today and posted on the DAS YouTube channel. You will also find the slides in the team's invitation. You're welcome to share with your other colleagues and encouraged to spread the word. See, make sure there's someone trying to join. And without further ado, at this time, I would like to welcome Justin Burnt and thank him for volunteering to share his insight with us today regarding scoping projects with external stakeholders. Justin graduated from OSU with a degree in forest engineering. He worked for 8 years in construction inspection for transportation projects for various consultants and agencies in Oregon. Justin started at ODOT in 2016, delivering federally funded local agency projects. In 2020, he changed roles to write policy and process for statewide scoping for ODOT and federally funded local agency projects that ODOT delivers on the local agency's behalf. Go right ahead, Justin. Thank you.
Thank you. So hopefully this will be, if nothing else, slightly entertaining and keep everyone intrigued in regards to the wonderful processes, documents, and things that ODOT does in order to scope our projects that go into the statewide improvement transportation, statewide transportation improvement program, the STIP. So what is ODOT scoping? Well, we'll be covering what the scoping program actually oversees. So what is the program that I manage as the program manager? General theory and purpose of why we even do scoping and why we are throwing so much money into it to begin with. A couple of the different documents we use, why we use them, and what kind of information are they going to contain that help us through the process and how we use them to deliver our projects. What we did in regards to a high-level process for how we conducted scoping, and then a couple lessons learned at the end of a couple items that we fixed for this current scoping cycle and plan to fix for forthcoming scoping cycles. As Amy said, feel free to chime in if you have questions and whatnot along the way. Love discussion pertaining to the topic, and I'm sure that not only hopefully will everyone here learn something, but hopefully you can help me learn something as well. So scoping program. So ODOT has quite a few different sections and areas within ODOT. So I am specifically within the project management office within project delivery under David Kim. So under David, within project delivery, we have design, project management, general process and delivery mechanisms for how to deliver projects for both ODOT projects, local agency projects that we deliver, as well as scoping and several other parts of what ODOT does on a daily basis. So all in all, what we want to do is we want to establish a high-level scope, schedule, and budget for all these wonderful projects that we're going to be putting into the STIP. So we want some kind of consistency. We want to know what the requirements are. We want to ensure that we document the requirements and what we come up with as part of scoping. And we want some kind of process in order to say, hey, here's how we're going to proceed. So not just going off and doing something willy-nilly. Nope, we love consistency. We want documentation. We want to be able to provide something to our counterparts that are going to be delivering these projects through design and construction to say, hey, here's our best shot. Hopefully this is very helpful. Take this, make it better, be able to deliver your project with hopefully a scope, schedule, and budget that is sufficient enough in order to help them all the way through. Fortunately, this also provide, as part of the program, we also provide training. So how is anyone going to know what to write in any of these wonderful forms that ODOT has produced and come up with if we don't actually explain what the form is for, the context around it, and what to put in each of the different boxes? So also coming back and looking backwards. So, okay, from the last scoping cycle, how did we do? How did these projects move through design and construction? Were they built within the scope, schedule, and budget that was established during scoping, or were there significant changes? And if so, why were there significant changes? So hopefully we can do a better job next time. So purpose of scoping, validating project purpose and need. How are we going to fund and deliver these projects, and trying to mitigate any kind of risks that we may run into along the way, as well as look for opportunities. So how can we get all this put together, and what are we going to push forward? So the outcomes, of course, are going to be a well-defined scope. So knowing of, okay, if it's a bridge project, well, is it are we fixing the bridge? Are we repaving on top of the bridge? Are we redoing the deck of the bridge? Or are we completely wiping the thing out and putting in something new? Well, we need to know from scoping. We need to do enough work during scoping in order to determine what is the scope of the project, not just coming out and saying, well, we need to do something with the bridge. No, we need to know exactly what are we planning to do with the bridge, how much it's going to cost, and what kind of timetable are we looking at in order to fully deliver the project. Schedule. So again, we want to have some kind of a definition around what the schedule looks like. We need to know, is this going to be a simple 2-year paving project of 6 months in design? We throw the thing out the door and we get the thing paved in 2 summer seasons. Or is it going to be a pedestrian project with 8 miles of trail going through downtown Portland that is going to take closer to 10 to 12 years between the planning, the permitting, the environmental work, etc. Budget. We need to make sure we're actually fully funding these projects. We don't want to get halfway through design and run into an issue of, oh, we just ran out of money, we can't finish. Well, now we have all these other things that we're leading up to or after this project that we also now can't complete as part of our transportation plan or other strategies in order to improve the system, either with ODOT alone or with other state or local agencies. Mitigating risk. So all of us know what risk is. It's that wonderful feeling that something is going to go terribly wrong or could go terribly wrong. Well, we need to make sure we're documenting what those are, especially those high level risks that could significantly impact the project, and then find a way to mitigate those. Looking at different project delivery approaches. So is it going to be a standard design bid build, possibly a CMGC, or some other kind of alternative delivery method in order to best deliver the project the most efficiently? And then, of course, looking for opportunities, not only for leveraging different types of funding, but also looking at opportunities for different approaches to delivering the project, to modifying the scope in order to better fit what is actually going to be the solution for the problem that we're trying to address. So let's talk about some of the beginning documents. The business case is our initial document that really sets the boundaries for what we're going to be doing during scoping, as well as moving into project delivery and all the way through. So we're going to have all kinds of discussions through maintenance, through planning, through discussions with the public or other agencies, either state, federal, or local agencies, discussing all these wonderful ideas for projects. Different project needs, pavement needs, our existing system needs repairs, or brand new needs, such as not having a path through a particular park, and there needs to be one for this particular group. So all these different funding programs have been gathering and conglomerating all these needs based on what their program is able to provide, and as well as coordinating between the different programs of, hey, we know we're going to have some money. Let's put all these business cases together, see what we can do in regards to scoping these to have a better idea about what it's actually going to take. So the program manager for the funding is going to provide us an initial business case to kind of walk us through, okay, from a high level, what do you know from before, from planning or other work that's already been done? And okay, what is that high level scope, schedule, and budget? Or essentially, what is the problem statement, and what are some proposed solutions that we need to look into? And then by the end of scoping, we should have a final business case after we've confirmed and revised the business case through going out and actually doing a scoping effort, which we'll get into, to where, okay, now we've refined everything to something that is a much more able to actually be delivered. And of course, we're going to think a little bit more of, are we going to do it in-house, or are we going to outsource, and what kind of delivery methods may be applicable and be able to be used for the project for the most efficiency. Another document that we'll take a look at a little bit later would be the draft project charter. So the charter is going to take the similar information that's in the business case, but take it to the next level. And what I mean by that is the business case is going to tell us the problem and solution statements. The charter is actually going to tell us, okay, what are those scope elements that we're actually going to be looking at? What are the different funding amounts that we're actually going to be programming into the STIP? What are some of the dates and deadlines that we're going to be setting for ourselves, and making sure that all that is going to be reasonable. Some of the other documents we're also going to put together as part of the scoping process is the work zone decision tree, essentially a document that we fill out both during scoping and through the design of the project in order to assist us with looking at the different alternatives, devices, and strategies that we could use in order to move people and vehicles around the project work zone. The risk register, where we will also talk a little bit more about that later, helps us document all those different risks that we'll be considering during scoping, as well as through the design of the project to see, okay, how can we assign some kind of contingency or adjust our schedule in order to still be able to mitigate or address these different risks that we know about. And then the backbone of the current scoping cycle we just got done for the 24-27 STIP, the CET, or the cost estimating template. As a result from prior scoping cycles, we took the information, we took all the different elements, the different technical disciplines, all the different factors that we wanted to ensure we took a look at as part of scoping, and put it into one functional document. We'll get into that a little bit more. It turned out to be quite the Excel spreadsheet. So a little bit closer glance at the ODOT business case, problem opportunity statements, description and need, what are the different potential solutions, project outcomes, goals, priorities, all of which can be a bunch of different factors that need to be considered during scoping and can and can affect or greatly affect the scope, schedule, and budget of the overall project, as well as rough timelines. If we know of any high impact risks, such as needing to put a trail or roadway or a new crossing across a railroad, high impact risk, don't know of all the different types and elements that may be necessitated in order to do that, we need to be listing such things. And then, of course, any additional background information that may be pertinent to the scoping effort or for leading into the design of the project. The project charter. So as I said, gets into a little bit more detail, more meant to ensure that we are conveying the needed information from scoping to those actually delivering the project and design. So again, listing our constraints and risks, some of our assumptions that we made during scoping, hopefully good assumptions. What kind of ideas did we have for how we're going to be delivering the project, our team members. We have our different dates that are associated with both the STIP and our general project delivery process for design. And then, of course, looking at our overall budget of how we have that listed in the STIP and see, hopefully that's also going to match up and we're fully funding projects, not coming up short in any one particular STIP phase. Oops, there we go. So back to the CET for a minute. So we have this giant spreadsheet with a whole bunch of different tabs for every different technical discipline that resides within ODOT, as well as some other areas. We're making sure that through our scoping process, we check all the boxes. So not only do we have every discipline, but we also have some other sections that reside within ODOT or within the state. Also look over some of this information to see if there's anything that we missed. Those areas may include public involvement. So what kind of public involvement needs or public engagement might we want to do or be thinking we may need to do as part of the project? What are the social equity concerns or questions that we need to ask ourselves to see how are we involving social equity in pertaining to both the scoping of the project, how the project overall is going to fit within the ODOT's overall strategies as an organization. And then when we do move forward into actually selecting projects after scoping the funding programs, how are they going to incorporate social equity or climate or some of these other things into their selection process to ensure we're actually incorporating what we need to. Our large CET also we're able to put into sketches, photos. We're able to put links into it to our document retainage system project-wise made by Bentley. And that way we're able to keep track and make sure that everything's going to be coming together at the end. I'll get more into that here in a moment. So repository for all items. So the CET encompasses all of our cost estimates for each of our different technical disciplines, roadway, traffic, right-of-way, utility estimates, stormwater estimates. Each of our different technical disciplines will look at what pertains specifically to their field. They will do either or and desk and in the field scoping effort in order to identify all those different parts and pieces that are affected by them based on the scope of the business case. And then come up with some kind of an estimate for what they think and why they think that will be the cost for the project. Part of this is having design checklists within the CET. So a veritable checklist of most of the main elements that may be of a significant impact to the project in order for them to not only think about, but also provide comment or clarity around why they would be checking, okay, yes, this is applicable, or no, this is not applicable based on something. So for instance, if we're within 500 feet of a railroad, we want to ensure that we are incorporating rail elements into the project, that we are coordinating with the appropriate railroad. So if we're just checking yes or no on a checklist saying, yeah, there's a railroad near the project, that doesn't really help us scope and prepare for how we are impacting the railroad or how they may be impacting our project. We want to make sure that's taken care of. And then it also gives us the opportunity to not just list what the estimate is going to look like for the project, but what kind of contingency are we going to look for? So for instance, having $1 million worth of funding for the design phase of the project. Well, maybe we may outsource that project, but we're not sure yet. We will want to add in a contingency of a certain amount to ensure that if we do outsource, that we're able to afford that. And then there's a few other things that are also incorporated into the CET, such as a set of equations and whatnot to help us determine if there are other alternative delivery methods that would be available to us based on other processes that we have internally to ODOT and our alternative delivery team. Whether or not we need or it's required to do value engineering based on other specific requirements from Federal Highway. Making sure we're able to break out each of the different components of our budget, such as PE, or essentially our design, or CE budgets. So what we're going to be spending for construction administration for the construction contract. And then we'll, of course, also want to make sure that we have some kind of inflation factor for when we actually plan on delivering these projects in the next STIP cycle. Take a quick look at the risk register. We can identify what the risk is. We can give some kind of a detailed description. And then we can also start listing what is the probability of it occurring, the minimum and maximum dollar amounts that we believe that this risk may carry with it. And then some of it will automatically calculate into other parts of the CET document in order to help us potentially inflate some of our numbers or budgets in order to make sure that we're going to have enough readily available for the project. But we want to ensure that we give our teams the flexibility to, okay, don't just look at the risk and don't just assume that it's going to occur. We need to look at this from a practical standpoint, look at the probability, and then this risk sheet will actually inform us of a number which we would be able to try to account for in that calculation for our final budget. But as I said, we're giving our teams the flexibility to take a look at that and ensure that we are looking at it from a reasonable standpoint and adjust it as needed. Also, as part of this, we can look at our schedule impacts. So is it going to affect the project by a few days, of which it may not be a very significant risk that we would want to consider, or it may have a several year impact, such as running into a 6F property impact. So us running through certain parks within the state that have had certain types of money spent on them could take us years in order to get through the full-blown environmental process with Federal Highway. So here's a close-up of the CET from the estimate tab. So we have some of the different elements: roadway, structures, traffic, hydraulics, geotechnical. We can have construction totals, including estimated construction totals for some of the other lump sum type items that we would typically have in our construction contracts, such as mobilization, traffic control, etc. We're able to add in contingencies based on what we think the project is actually going to need. There's been some analysis done, so we have a few tabs within the CET that are hidden in order to help us look at this a little bit more consistently. But we're still giving our scoping teams the flexibility to look at this again from a practical standpoint and add in additional contingency based on the information they have. Here's a quick close-up of our ADS, or our Alternative Delivery Scope and Analysis worksheet. The principle behind this is you fill this out pertaining to what the project is or able to be doing. And it takes into account how much money, different scope aspects of the project, and it's going to spit out whether or not it's going to allow us through our other processes to look at value engineering, cost risk assessment, or whether or not we would be able to use some of our other processes for alternative delivery methods, such as design build rather than design bid build. A little bit more information, just looking strictly at the one part where we look at value engineering and CRA for our PE estimate, making sure that these things do cost money. Even if we are looking at value engineering, we want to make sure that it's going to be actually useful to the project rather than a burden. So depending on the size of the project and what risk may be involved, it may not even be worth looking at a value engineering study or cost risk assessment for that project. It's just not going to provide enough benefit for it to actually be worth it. So before we get too much into process, here is just what we look at from beginning of scoping all the way through what we call the design acceptance phase of a project, which is getting into the design of the project. We have a lot of processes, a lot of documents, some of which may be of use or pertinent to other agencies. However, a lot of this is strictly pertinent to our own internal processes and procedures. But it begins to show all the different elements that we go through as part of the scoping process and start our way into design. So beginning at the initial business case development with the program managers, and to the discussions about what the projects are from what the funding program managers provide, to the actual scoping effort, and then all the way into project selection based off of the scope schedules and budgets that are submitted to the funding programs after scoping, and then into our STIP adoption process, and finally into starting a project for design. So what did we do this last time around that improved what we've done in the past? So in the past, we haven't really had a statewide process. ODOT is broken up into 5 different regions. Each region was provided the opportunity to use their own documentation, their own methods and procedures in regards to estimation, as well as the development of the scope, schedule, and budget of all these projects that we put into the STIP. So this last scoping cycle for the 24-27 STIP coming up, I'm sorry, we actually had better defined scoping roles. So we wanted specific people to be at different levels in order to ensure that as you go up those levels, people they know who they had to go to for what information. We started using the work zone decision tree. So again, looking at those work zone strategies, what devices are we going to use? How are we going to do the work zone? How are we going to get people through our work zone in ways that makes sense, ensure that we're addressing ADA and so on. We didn't typically use that in the past in regards to scoping. We waited until we were already in design in order to take a look at that. Now we brought that back in order to at least start thinking about those concepts, thinking about what strategies we may be able to use. So for those projects that may have a little bit more complication in them, we'll know that in advance and hopefully be able to compensate in regards to our schedule and budget. Project-wise, so Bentley project-wise, we finally have a central location to store all of our scoping information. We've had this system for some time now. I don't know exactly when we implemented it, but we've had it for at least the last 2 scoping cycles. However, this time around, we actually had guidance and process in order to ensure that we use it and use it in a consistent manner that we haven't had in the past. We've also began using electronic signatures. So most of our documents have some kind of signature box at the bottom. If we were to go back up in the slides, looking at the business case, there's a level of different authorities that need to buy off on what that scope, schedule, and budget from a high level look like. We've now started using digital signatures rather than having to send that around as a paper document like we have in the past. And then also as part of the scoping process and within the CET, each of the different technical disciplines can provide a recommendation or see if we're able to do any kind of advanced investigation. So ODOT considers advanced investigation being able to do any of that preliminary work up front. So let's say a paving project, for instance, if we wait until we're actually in design for the project, and then we are going to start looking at Corp taking samples of the pavement out from the project site, bring those in, do the testing, come up with some kind of analysis. It can take a significant amount of time. So for some of these different types of projects, such as lengthy pavement projects, or maybe a deck of a large bridge, taking off, doing a grind and inlay, some kind of a structural inlay, we can go out and do some of that work ahead of time with some money that has been specifically set aside for those types of advanced investigation type issues. So here's the different roles and responsibilities that we've started to come up with. We have others as well that are still being worked out for future process improvements, but we have and always have had funding program managers, but now identifying them as a very specific role with specific responsibilities. So making sure they're the ones that are managing their portfolio funding, making sure that they are providing us with those initial business cases to tell us what the scope, schedule, and budget of that project is, and then ensure that they are on board with what the final solution is that comes out of scoping. So if the final solution doesn't fit within their particular funding program or they're in disagreement, that means we need to go back to the drawing board. We have some additional work to do to ensure everybody's on board with how we are planning to move forward with a proposed project. We need someone to sponsor these projects. So who's going to ensure this actually moves forward after it's selected? So using our area managers, those who are directly responsible within the regions for delivering these projects or managing those who are delivering the projects. Also listed here are some other people that can fulfill that particular role, but someone who actually wants this project to move forward. Maintenance. We need to ensure our maintenance people are actually on board with what the proposed solution is, because they're going to have to take care of it later. So we have to involve them in the process. We have to do some kind of coordination effort with our maintenance folks to ensure whatever we do build on the state highway system, that they're able to maintain. And then the heart of the scoping effort, each region will have their own, or has had their own, scoping coordinator, of which all the scoping documentation, questions, problems, issues, all go through that particular person and then come up to me if there's a substantial issue or problem that can't be resolved. So making sure that there's that line of communication. So if there are issues, if there are problems, if there's a question pertaining to process or document, that can get resolved quickly by the people that have had the training and have the experience around scoping, both this and prior cycles. Or if it's something that hasn't been addressed before, it needs to come up to the program level, to me, in order to address on a statewide level, and then ensure that goes back to the scoping coordinator so all the regions are aware. So what are they going to do? The scoping coordinator is going to collect all that documentation. So it doesn't matter if it's from the technical disciplines, from the project managers that are trying to lead all these teams of technical experts, either at the desk or in the field looking at a project, making sure that all that goes into our system in a consistent manner. So into project-wise with the right naming convention, making sure that everything's being scheduled, the meetings that are needed are held, and all those discussions between all the different parties are able to be taken care of within the time frame we have for scoping. So for scoping, we only have a limited amount of time. We start roughly a year in advance of when we need to start thinking about getting things into a draft STIP. And then that draft STIP has to go through its own processes and procedures to be finally adopted by the Oregon Transportation Commission. I won't get too far into that. That's generally after I let off from scoping. So the program managers, we have to make sure that we know what they're providing us, when they're providing it to us, and then, okay, when are we going to be able to get things done? So some of the coordination between the funding program managers and the scoping coordinators is making sure that everybody knows what we're actually doing. So the scoping coordinators have kept lists of what were all the business cases that were submitted, what are the current estimates, what is the scope of the project, what is the schedule of the project, and ensuring that the funding program managers are involved in the discussions, as well as any final decisions pertaining to any of that. The scoping teams, they're the ones that are going out and doing all the work, filling in all the boxes, checking all the boxes, making sure that all the information is assembled, put together, and provided to the scoping coordinator. So this could include our tech centers, all of our technical disciplines, our planning units, our maintenance offices, different sections or areas within ODOT, making sure that everything's going where it needs to be, and then making sure that each team member that is needed to be included is included in the process of scoping. So real quick, some scoping team responsibilities. So making sure that we're doing what we need to be doing. We're not getting too far off track. We're sticking to looking at scope, schedule, and budget for these projects, not getting too deep into the weeds or details. We're not designing a project yet. We're just scoping. But we need to make sure we have enough detail to keep us moving to be able to provide that initial scope, schedule, and budget of the project. So making sure we're, having meetings, we're researching our design standards, our legal requirements, and we're prepared to scope these projects accordingly. Rough timeline of when we started for this last cycle. We started around January of 2021 with the OTC approving our different amounts of funding for different funding programs, and then started scoping February, March of 2021. Now we're in the current phase of developing the draft STIP. And this December, January, hopefully we'll have draft STIP adoption by the OTC and move forward on to further parts of the STIP process in order to get it fully approved and adopted. With any scoping process, we're going to start at our desks. We're going to look at maps. We're going to look at research. We're going to look at the information we've already got prior to going out into the field and looking at the actual project area. We're going to start looking at, well, what did the initial business case say? What all do we need to look at when we go out to do the field scoping? And is there anything else that we can do in the office rather than spending that time out in the field? We want to make that as fruitful as possible. We had advanced investigation processes in place, as well as how to do a benefit cost analysis. We wanted to make sure that we had processes in place prior to providing an opportunity to each of the different regions for how to do scoping. And what we do is we use technical services bulletins in order to detail some of that information in regards to some of our processes, such as the advanced investigation, how that operates, what is the process to do that, and what funding are we using. And then some of the other parts and pieces, I won't get too far into this, but some of the requirements for what we do for certain projects is dictated by legislation. So like House Bill 2017 gave us specific requirements for some of our projects that we need to ensure that we do certain things, such as a benefit cost analysis of how beneficial is this particular project and how can we keep moving forward. So quick glimpse of project-wise, all of our scoping projects, all of our scoping documentation, draft through final goes into project-wise. We have project numbers associated with each of the different scoped projects, as well as being able to take any of these scoped projects, and if they are selected and put into the STIP has a different identifier called a key number. We're able to take those and move those into those key numbered folders at a later point and keep all that information in one central location for any and all of ODOT to be able to have access to, depending on who's assigned to a particular project. For this last scoping cycle, all the data was entered by our scoping coordinators. So 5 people within the state for several hundred different projects that were scoped. All that information funneled through the appropriate channels in order to ensure that everything was done in a consistent and orderly manner. We did have some guidance in order to make sure that all of this could function as smoothly as possible. So the project management office, of which I reside, led an effort to create such a document in order to help clarify some of these scoping documents, practices, processes, and outcomes. So again, a very brief document. It at least covers the purpose of scoping, what each of the different levels of scoping require, what are the inputs and outputs, some of the roles and responsibilities, and where are we putting all this, which is in project-wise. But what it didn't cover is it didn't take anyone step-by-step through how to do scoping. So we didn't handhold our teams. We didn't tell them exactly what information to put in what box and what form. We just told them, these are the documents you need to provide. Each of the technical disciplines is familiar with and should know how to fill out their own documentation and provide that as part of the scoping process. And then identifying those few extra parts that are requirements as a result of what the region needs to provide, such as any kind of narrative or other document that the region itself would provide outside of our cost estimating template. So again, we focused on the guidance that we were providing as just a minimum standard. Each of the regions was given the opportunity that if they thought it was needed to provide additional information or documentation, they were allowed to do so. So those minimum standards, making sure that we got those initial business cases and that they were finalized by the end of the project, that any desk or field scoping was completed, and making sure that the funding programs were able to select a project at the end. My slideshow is actually taking longer than I thought. So desk scoping, relatively self-explanatory. You're at your desk, you're looking at the given information, the business case, and seeing what information can you do in the office rather than spending the time to go out to the actual project and to better refine your scope, schedule, and budget. And then field scoping, making sure the people that actually need to go out into the field are able to do so in a quick, efficient, and safe manner. obtain the information needed, and get back into the office in order to further document that information. So checking things such as in-water work windows, what we may interact with in regards to traffic restrictions, things that you can really see much better when you're actually out in the field looking at the project compared to in the office looking at Google Maps or something that's not as, you're not able to identify some of those factors by being in the office. You have to go out in the field, you have to look at the current conditions and surroundings of the project. We wanted to make sure this was an iterative process. So as we came up with solutions, confirming with the funding programs that the solution was feasible, practical, and reasonable, and still fit within their particular funding program. So making sure that whatever we proposed was able to be bought off on by the time we got to the end of the scoping process. ODOT has implemented QA/QC processes, not just within scoping, but also all the way through design. We wanted to ensure that during this last scoping cycle that we were able to implement that and have. So each of the different technical disciplines have their own quality plan that has addressed quality on some level. And so we ensured that through all of this, that there was a level of both quality control and quality assurance from each of those different technical disciplines to ensure that we are putting out a quality product at the end. So ODOT did look through a variety of different parts of risk management. This is one of the slides that one of our risk folks has put together in order to kind of detail some of the additional steps that we would look at going through scoping and into design. Where we need to identify what they are, analyze what it is, prioritize it, plan for it, implement some kind of response if needed, and then of course monitor and review just in case something else pops up. So there were two other elements in scoping for this time around that we've never really dealt with before. Climate being one of them. So we had a executive order directly from the governor's office saying you will look at greenhouse gas emissions and the impacts of these projects that we are in the process of scoping and report back on it. So as part of that, the climate office looked into doing a survey to each of the funding programs. Each of those funding programs would submit a survey for each of those different projects that they were thinking about scoping to see, well, where does that project fall in regards to a greenhouse gas index? So would it effectively be helping the state for greenhouse gas emissions or hurting the state for greenhouse gas emissions based on scope and other factors? So the climate office did both a survey as well as had some questions within the CET in order to help them gain the information needed to do that analysis and provide feedback back to the governor's office. And then social equity would be the other one that we haven't really looked at from a selection or scoping standpoint in the past, but it is a strategic action goal for ODOT in our strategic action plan. So we wanted to ensure at some way that we did look at social equity and how it's affecting our projects. So as part of this, we wanted to at least have a good start with some data and information. So we asked the funding program managers as well as the scoping teams to look at each project from what we call a social equity lens. So based on the guidance and information that ODOT has or the Social Equity Office has, take a look at the project and see how can we better engage with the public, the stakeholders, those in the communities that these projects are affecting, being able to identify how are we affecting these projects, as well as what kind of feedback are we getting back from these communities so we can better our own project for the future. And the way we did that is we asked a different sets of questions depending on the person and part of the process through scoping. The funding program manager would answer a certain set of questions based on their preliminary knowledge of the project and what they were proposing for a solution. And as the scoping teams took it from the funding program manager up to selection of projects, that scoping team would be able to better evaluate based on the new information that they got from scoping of how are we impacting those communities and how can we ensure that we are meeting some of those needs. Some of our prior lessons learned is consistency is key, as well as having adequate resources. So not having consistency between all 5 regions of what documents are required, what processes are required. There was a significant difference in the level of resources needed depending on the region. And so we wanted to address that however possible, or we wanted to address that issue by bringing in at least some level of high level consistency across all 5 regions for both documents and process. We also wanted to ensure that we involved all the needed technical disciplines, not just the ones that someone thinks may be necessary, but we wanted to ensure that every technical discipline touched each scoped project to see, okay, is my particular technical discipline needed for this project or is it not? And then also ensure that through the CET and the risk management tool within the CET, are we addressing the risks associated with the project? Are we assigning any kind of additional contingency? And if we are, why? And finally, having a statewide program portfolio review of all these projects, looking at leveraging opportunities. So making sure the funding programs, the scoping coordinators are all communicating. So if there is an opportunity for several programs to engage in a project that any one may not be able to fund for a particular reason, well, maybe together we can come up with a opportunity to be able to fund the project and get it completed. And then some new lessons learned as after this last cycle is, so we didn't have those step-by-step nuanced steps in our processes detailed out in any kind of a guidance document in order to help everybody or handhold some of our folks all the way through the process. That was determined that the guidance document we provided was actually too high level. Now we know we needed to provide additional information to help those who hadn't gone through scoping before, or to just provide additional clarity around some of the deliverables and processes that we didn't know that we needed to provide. We found new information. We found other nuances within the regions that needed clarity that we had not provided in the past. Some of our statewide templates could be better. So looking at the CET, it is a very large, complex document, which I will show you here briefly. We have well over 20 different tabs for all the different technical disciplines. We have narratives for all the different areas of design, a rather complicated cost estimate. I already showed you the project risk register earlier. And then just looking at the roadway elements tab, we have quite a few different items for consideration. So trying to encompass all of this within a short time frame and with a limited budget and get this fully filled out and completed was more than what we could do within the time and constraints that we had. So now we're looking at how can we make this more functional form? How can we make it more applicable where it needs, but not have additional work being considered that wouldn't generally be applicable to most of the projects? So how can we make this process more efficient? and making sure we're being flexible. Anytime we take away flexibility, we are then leading ourselves into failure in some sort because of such a large variety of scopes that we have for our transportation projects and all the different stakeholders that we need to involve. We often need to involve transit agencies, other state agencies, local agencies, federal agencies, all the different types of regulatory agencies. If our guidance process is so inflexible that we can't expand and allow for input and flexibility to all these other agencies, as well as the communities we work in, we're limiting our opportunity to improve. But again, we need to at least have enough consistency within our processes, templates, and guidance to make sure we can all get on the right path and we can be consistent enough to be efficient. With that, I will end my spiel and I will open it up in case anyone has any questions or comments pertaining to what I presented. Amy, I'm afraid I put them to sleep.
Oh, I'm sure that's not the case.
I figured I'd start off and ask, what is the portability for to other entities, cities, counties, tribes, etc.?
You're talking about the documents used?
Documents as well as the process.
So the process, as well as most of our documents, are exceedingly ODOT centric. Most of our documents were developed with ODOT and state highway use in mind. Some of our documents are able to be used for the local agency projects that do come through ODOT. However, it is still being worked out through the other program that I manage in order to better those documents and make them more applicable. So at this time, Alan, I would say it's going to take some time to make it more applicable to those other agencies that may want to use our documentation. But I will also say that some of our documents will remain ODOT centric. But if there is guidance, direction, or just advice that any of the other agencies here would like to gather, I would be more than happy to assist with gathering what we can. See a hand up.
Tiffany? Yep.
I did have a question. Lower my hand. Bug me. Anyway, have you looked into some of the Microsoft products that are going to roll out to the different agencies? I know we at DOR don't have this one particular one yet, but the workflow or like the forms workflow where you can kind of create a form in a Microsoft product. I can't remember what it's specifically called, but basically then it can kind of move through a process. Like you create the form, you could target, what's applicable, what's not, so that like certain things populate or don't populate if you don't need it, that kind of thing. So it help your efficiency a little bit more. I don't know if ODOT's received that yet.
So I know there are some people within the agency that are using some of the Microsoft Forms functions. It is not widely available as of yet that I'm aware of. We were starting to look at Power Platform as potentially being a route for us to put all of our data into a centralized location that is not already housed within other systems. Talking with those with our technical folks, a lot of that being over my head, but rather than going with Power Platform at the moment, since there's still some details that need to be worked out, we've decided to move forward with Smart Sheets, at least for the moment. So the large cost estimated template document, similar to what you were saying, Tiffany, we're going to move forward and have a lot of these forms and whatnot automatically fill in based on other information as we enter it into the CET through Smart Sheets, and have some of that automatically fill into other areas. So rather than someone having to go through and fill out a separate section, hopefully like the alternative delivery and some of the other sections would already be pre-filled out for us as we move through. So we're looking at those advances. We're just not quite there yet. This will be a new process improvement for our next scoping cycle, beginning probably in mid to late 2024 for the 2730 STIP.
All right, seeing no additional questions.
There's one question in the chat actually about, is STIP subject to DAS EIS oversight guidelines? And if so, how does this integrate with the stage gate process?
Let's see, DAS EIS oversight guidelines. I'm not actually sure what that is. The STIP is guided by specific federal law and requirements pertaining to any state transportation improvement program. So each state is required to have one per federal highway, the Code of Federal Regulations. I can't quote exactly which number it is at the moment. But we are, oh, thank you. But as part of those Federal Highway Code of Federal Regulations, they actually tell us all the different requirements and whatnot that we have to do in order to deliver a federally funded transportation project, most of which is what the STIP covers. So the STIP is also going to cover some state funded projects, of which we have to meet all the specific requirements listed in the ORSs. So Oregon state law. And then their ODOT has also developed some of its own rules and processes to ensure that we have policy and guidance for our own internal folks on how to deliver these projects in a consistent manner. Oversight for technology. Yes. We can't go ahead and just start using whatever technology we want. We have to go up through ISB to get permission. So as part of this discussion around smart sheets and having a statewide, for ODOT at least, a centralized system for scoping and moving into project development after that, we are having conversations through our own technology folks within ODOT who are then relaying that information off to ISB. I have been informed this morning that we do have a go-ahead to move forward with smart sheets, at least for the time being, until something bigger and better comes along.
I believe Dale was saying that EIS, Enterprise Information Services, oversees state technology projects, since ODOT is not technically a technology delivering technology services. They may not be oversight for ODOT's projects, or at least their construction projects.
Right, but they would look over if we institute a new technology system or something to that extent. So some of the details around smart sheets is still being worked out between ODOT and I guess DAS or other high level technology folks that I haven't had direct contact with.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Looking at the chat, looking at the hands up. Not seeing either. I'll go ahead and begin to close out the meeting. We hope you all gained a greater understanding of scoping with external stakeholders. We want to say a huge thank you to Justin, and thank you all for attending. I've posted a link to a short survey in the chat that will help us improve future PMUG experiences. You can look for a follow-up email with links to resources. We'll also post some feedback forms, including one you can fill out to nominate yourself or a colleague as a future speaker. Again, if you're interested in business analyst processes, visit the Bang website posted earlier in the chat, and enjoy the rest of your week. We'll see you again in January. Thank you so much, Justin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Bye.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks.